So can we start? So we're going to discuss schistosomiasis, which is a parasitic infection. It's the third most significant parasitic infection of public health significance. It comes after malaria and the intestinal worms. So by the end of my discussion with you, you should be able to discuss the life cycle. I know this is a revision, but the emphasis is going to be on S. hematobium. You should be able to say something about the epidemiology of the parasite, the pathogenesis and clinical features of schistosomiasis, laboratory diagnosis and approach to management, and possible complications that could occur. So this is my outline. As I stated earlier, schistosomiasis is the third most significant parasitic infection of public health significance. It has a major impact in the tropical and subtropical regions of the world. And the reason is because the snail intermediate host needs the appropriate temperature and moisture, which is present in this region to sustain its own life cycle. As a result, the infection is restricted to geographical areas. Three common species that are associated with human infections are Schistosoma hematobium, mansoni, and japonicum. Of course, there are other less significant species, less significant in the sense that they are highly restricted to certain regions of the world. But these, hematobium, mansoni, and japonicum, are relatively more common. The resulting disease is schistosomiasis, which is also referred to as bilharziasis. This is named after the German scientist who was the first person to describe the life cycle of this parasite. Schistosomiasis is also referred to as snail fever because you need the snail intermediate host for the life cycle to be completed. Now let's do a little bit of revision. Schistosomes are trematodes. From POD, what do you recall? What are trematodes?
That's one segment, sir. That's okay.
Okay, one segment, at least we are moving some.
They're flat?
They are flat, very good.
Leaf-shaped?
Very good. And so they are unsegmented, so one unit. Flatworms. Still remember?
Yeah.
The other one is the other group that is segmented.
Nematodes.
The ones that are segmented.
Cystodes?
Cystodes, the tape ones. Very good. So we still remember schistosomes are trematodes, which are supposed to be flatworms. As a result of these features of trematodes, schistosomes stand out because they have distinct features that makes them different from the usual trematodes. First is the eggs, the nature of the eggs. With schistosomes, the eggs have what we call spines. With the other trematodes, they have what we call operculum, or opercular for many. So the operculum is an opening through which the juvenile worm will escape once it's in the body of water. But with schistosomes, we don't have this structure. So this is a distinct feature associated with schistosomes. Now, most trematodes are hermaphrodites. So both the male and the female reproductive organs are supposed to be present in one unit, in the same unit, right? With schistosomes, the male and the female worms exist as separate entities. So they are not hermaphrodites. So they are not flatworms, in quote, okay? Although they are regarded as trematodes. They are obligate intravascular parasites. Now for the other trematodes, they tend to be found in tissues. So for example, you have the lung fluke, you have the liver fluke. With schistosomes, the adult worms are found within the intravascular space. So they are referred to as blood flukes. The infective form can penetrate intact, healthy skin. With the other trematodes, they tend to be ingested, for example, on freshwater plants or in crabs that are intermediate hosts. But schistosomes, the juvenile worm actively seeks out the host and can actually penetrate through the skin to establish an infective process. So, what is the peculiarity of the mealworm? The mealworm is bigger or larger than the female worm, and it tends to fold over, forming an opening which is referred to as the gynecophoric canal. This is where the female worm is usually located. So here you have the diagram, and of course you have the suckers. The suckers are for attachment, remember. So here is an actual picture of the adult worms. The female worm is within the gynecophoric canal of the gynecophoric canal of the adult male. What else can you say about these adult worms in terms of the color, the appearance?
They're
red.
Females
It's
darker?
red, yes. So that further tells you where the adult worms are found, in the blood vessel. Now, in terms of epidemiology, Schistosoma hematobium occurs predominantly through the Nile Valley and many other parts of Africa. Again, I've told you what determines the prevalence of the parasite is the suitability of the environment in terms of temperature and moisture, and the presence of the intermediate snail host. So the snail hosts are well adapted to these regions of the world. In endemic areas, infection is first acquired in early childhood, so you have repeated infection if there is no treatment. The prevalence and intensity of infection peaks at age 15 to 20 years, and intensity declines with age. So this is the usual thing. But you can have a man-made environment, man-made in quote. You know, due to rapid urbanization, you have to expand the urban areas. So you have to provide social services such as electricity and potable water. In order to provide electricity, you create dams. So these dams are going to provide another ecological niche in which this snail intermediate host can thrive. So you cannot have the expansion of infection into non-endemic areas just because you have cited the dam. Are you following? So you can have it as a disease of economic progress. So before I discuss the next slide, I want somebody to remind us the life cycle of Schistosoma species. Yes, anybody.
Intermediate host is there, that's it.
Anybody, just one person. If you're confident enough, yes, start.
It's indirect because it lives in the snails and then infect humans, travel through blood, person, yeah, it's excreted in urine, I think, and then reinfects the snail and continue its life cycle.
Thank you. He's correct. It has an indirect life cycle, but he didn't really describe the life cycle. He has told us the attributes of the life cycle. It's indirect because there are two hosts that are needed for the organism to mature. Yes, any other volunteer? If if you were to discuss the life cycle of a parasite, where do you start from?
Infective form.
The infective form. So where is the infective form coming from?
The snail.
Water.
Water.
Direct host.
It comes from the Sinai.
It comes from the snail. So are you going to start discussing the life cycle from the stage of the snail, or?
I have no idea, to be honest. I would discuss it, but I don't know.
Okay, if you have a parasite that has an indirect life cycle and you want to discuss the life cycle, you normally start from the definitive host. Remember the definitive host, what's the definition?
Where the
Where the sexual cycle occurs.
spans
Or,
majority of the time.
or the matured form.
True.
Okay, so that means we are going to start from here. An infected individual. Now, depending on the species we are discussing, the eggs are passed either in feces or in urine. But because the emphasis is on hematobium, we are going to focus on urine, right? So the eggs are passed out in the urine. Now, if you have indiscriminate urination in the environment, these eggs, when they get into the body of water, they are going to liberate the first juvenile worm stage, the miracidium for one, miracidia for many. Okay? These miracidia are motile, and they will actively seek out the snail intermediate host. Now, if the appropriate snail intermediate host is not available, it takes 72 hours for the miracidia to die. So within 72 hours, they must find a suitable snail host. Is that clear? Within the snail, they are going to undergo further development, okay? And eventually, the cercaria are going to emerge from the snail intermediate host. Again, the cercaria is motile. It has a forked tail, and it swims around in the water. When an uninfected individual comes again to swim in the body of water, the cercaria is able to penetrate through the skin because it has hydrolytic enzymes in this portion of the head, and it's going to gain access into the subcutaneous circulation. Once that happens, it's going to lose its tail, and it's going to transform into what we call a schistomule. Now, the schistomule does something. It incorporates the host antigens onto its outer surface so that the immune system does not recognize it as foreign. Eventually, depending on the species you are dealing with, the schistomule will transform into adult worms in the appropriate venous system. So for S. hematobium, it's going to be the venous plexus supplying the, draining the vein, draining the bladder, sorry. With other species, say for example Mansani, it's going to be the mesenteric veins that drain the large colon or the small intestine, okay? Depending on the species. Now, these adult worms as well coat themselves with the host antigens. So both the schistomule, or the schistomula for many, and the adult worms do not elicit an immune response because they've already coated themselves with host antigens, so the body does not see them as foreign. While in these locations, the adult worms will mate and they start producing eggs. Now, they don't leave the intravascular space. Rather, the eggs that are produced are motile. So these eggs will burrow through the wall of the vessels, through the wall of the bladder in this case, and have access to the urine. With the other species, it's going to be through the vessels into the lumen of the GI. Is that clear? So this newly infected person, if he or she goes around again, passing urine indiscriminately in the environment, the eggs will have access to fresh water and the entire life cycle is repeated. Is that clear? Any questions? So this is what I just described. Okay, so what's the pathogenesis like? As stated earlier, the adult worms don't cause any immune response. But you see, the eggs, they are antigenic. So they are going to elicit an inflammatory response. Now these eggs, most of the time, with S. hematobium, a fertile female worm will produce about 20 to 200 eggs per day. So most of these eggs will find their way through the vessel wall, through the bladder wall to the urine. But some of them are entrapped within the wall of the bladder. And you have the formation of granulomata around these eggs. With time, you have deposition of collagen and you have fibrous tissue formed. So you're going to have fibrotic lesions in the affected organ with time. So it's important for you to note this, that the early feature that we see is the formation of granuloma, and subsequently you have fibrotic lesions. This explains the complications that can result from a long-standing infection. With long-standing infection, it may lead to malignant transformation, particularly with S. hematobium. So how does the patient present? At the site of penetration of the cercaria, you can have dermatitis or some form of allergic reaction. Now, I want you to note that the dermatitis associated with human schistosoma species is different from a swimmer's itch. Have you heard of the term swimmer's itch?
Yes.
Okay. With swimmer's itch, it's usually due to species that don't infect humans, usually non-human species, okay? But the cercaria will still penetrate through the skin, but it won't undergo further development. So there's intense inflammatory reaction. So you have what we call the swimmer's itch. With human schistosomes, the inflammatory response is not so florid. You may have some degree of dermatitis, but the patient will hardly present at this stage. With schistosoma hematobium, remember that the eggs are burrowing their way through the vessel wall, through the bladder wall. So there is hematuria. The patient will complain of hematuria. With long-standing infection, there could be loss of bladder capacity. Remember that the bladder is elastic. But when you have chronic inflammation with fibrotic changes, the elasticity decreases, right? So there will be loss of bladder capacity. You can also have obstructive uropathy because these eggs can come in from any direction, okay? So somewhere along the line, you may have fibrotic changes that will obstruct urine outflow. Let me also add that in endemic areas, in female patients, it's possible for these eggs to find their way into the uterus, the fallopian tube, and the ovaries. So in women, you may have some degree of obstruction in the fallopian tube or complete obstruction. When there is total obstruction, it leads to infertility. When you have partial obstruction, it leads to ectopic pregnancies. So these are likely complications associated with long-standing schistosomal infection in females. And as we stated earlier, the most feared complication is you can have a malignant transformation. Usually it's squamous cell carcinoma, not transitional cell carcinoma. So how do you make a diagnosis? Microscopy is the first line of diagnosis, particularly in endemic areas. And what are we looking out for? Usually we are looking out for the characteristic eggs of the parasite. You still remember the eggs, what they look like? How would you describe it?
Spine.
Yeah,
Terminal
where is the spine located?
Terminal.
Very good. Now, excretion is believed to be maximal around midday. Now, some people postulate it's because this is about the time we are likely to engage in water-related activities. I mean, 12 midnight, if this is the time for maximal excretion of the eggs, nobody goes swimming 12 midnight, right? So that's useless. So to increase the chances of the miracidia coming into contact with the snail host, maximal excretion of the egg occurs within about midday. Biopsy is another approach to diagnosis, but of course, this is not for the microbiology lab. This goes to the histology lab. Serodiagnosis can help, and this is done by the micro lab. Serodiagnosis can help when you have infections that are beyond the genitourinary tract. What do I mean by this? It's also possible for patients with this infection to have CNS involvement or to have pulmonary infection, or like I told you, in women, you may have involvement of the uterus or the fallopian tube or the ovaries. So you can have extra sites that are invaded by the eggs. Under these conditions, you may not find ova in the urine, but the patient is infected. But remember, I told you that the eggs are antigenic. So you can still use a serodiagnosis approach to arrive at a diagnosis. We said urine microscopy is our best approach. Do you just send any type of urine? The answer is no. Preferably, you want a urine that is collected about the time when you have maximal excretion of the eggs. Okay? So this is to increase your chances of making a diagnosis. So the urine collection should be between 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. It is recommended by the WHO that, particularly in children, that they must exercise before the urine sample is collected. Now, it's a recommendation. Some studies say it enhances the excretion of the urine. Some studies said it doesn't have an effect. Others said actually it doesn't. Okay? So, but WHO still recommends in children, in endemic areas, let them exercise, or sometime maybe run around, go up and down the steps or whatever, before you collect the urine. So what do you do to the urine? You collect it in a large bottle, allow the eggs to settle by gravity, and then decant and look at the sediments. What you're looking out for are the characteristic eggs, and like you all rightly said, we are looking out for the diagnostic terminal spines. And in this micrograph, you have actual patient sample, and you can see that there are a lot of red blood cells in the slide. So you've made a diagnosis. What is your approach to management? This is one parasitic infection in which drug treatment is very important. If you treat the patient adequately, then you're going to prevent the excretion of the eggs. And if you also provide annual prophylactic preventive doses. You're going to prevent patients who have subclinical features. Praziquantel is the most effective against schistosomes that are known to infect humans. So what are the what are the complications that could occur? Malignant transformation can occur, particularly in long-standing, untreated, or poorly treated schistosomiasis. You can have obstructive uropathy anywhere along the urinary tract. And like I said, in women, you may also have involvement of the reproductive organs. So you may have infertility, ectopic pregnancies as complications that could arise from this condition. The patient may have recurrent urinary tract infection, okay? And remember that E. coli is the leading agent of UTI. So how can we prevent infection from taking place? Remember that this is a vector-mediated infection. So if you don't have the intermediate host, then you're going to break that chain that we described earlier. So molluscicides, that is chemical agents that can kill off snails, can help to control the infection in a community, particularly when you are citing a dam. Okay? Remember we said that it can also be a disease of economic progress. So if you treat the area with agents that will kill off the snails, you're going to prevent infection. You should give, particularly to tourists coming to endemic areas, you should give health advisories to avoid swimming in freshwater lakes and rivers when they go to these endemic areas. If you get an index patient, you must treat adequately. Because remember, if the patient is adequately treated, then the eggs are no longer present in the urine. It may be difficult for you to control human behavior. So you may tell them, oh, don't go micturating close to the lake or the river, but then you can't go around policing everybody. Some people will still do that. But if you treat adequately, you're going to ensure that even if they break the rule, they are not introducing the eggs into the environment. Encourage safe disposal of human waste. You can do that through provision of safe disposal facilities, okay? And of course, health education. Health education is important because even if you provide adequate waste disposal facilities, if the people don't appreciate the importance of this, they may not use it. So health education is also important. Provision of potable water. You remember the picture in the first slide. You have those women doing their laundry and the kids having their bath. So if you provide potable water, there will be no reason for them to go to the lake or the river, okay? So you can prevent infection. Any questions? So enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.